continent of Africa, the whole continent, has about 2,000 different kinds of food crops. 2,000. We in the United States are down to 15 for 75% of our food. We are eating 15 crops. They are eating 2,000. That sort of shows you the very, very different approach to food production. They want to sustain that. They want to sustain the biodiversity of their food. Because when there's a drought, something still lives and they can eat it. And they also get much more nutrition than, of course, we do from 15 simple crops. Along with that production choice of the selection of seed, they are refusing the exchange of seed that happens in commercial industrial agriculture. They are building their own seed banks, and their approach is the best way to conserve seed is to use it. Let me say that again. The best way to conserve seed is to use it. Because then you plant it, you name it, you know about it, and you keep it alive. And yes, occasionally, and it's called in situ conservation, occasionally you have to put it in seed banks, ex situ. And that's just kind of a last result insurance policy. But they're very actively promoting in situ seed conservation for that. So a very, very different pattern. We have the largest seed bank in the world in Colorado. The U.S. has been busy since the 19th century collecting seed from around the world. And the FAO, the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, has gotten after the U.S. several times, again, to no avail. We have about 30 to 40% failure rate in this Colorado seed bank. So ex situ kills seed, in situ preserves seed. And then finally, the farmers. And when you talk about food and farmers across the African continent, the farmers are female, overwhelmingly, and they are the keepers of the seed. When there was a cyclone in Mozambique, local NGOs started gathering local seed to replace it. And they gathered a lot of seed to help the farmers as they went back to their fields after the flooding was down. And the local NGOs found out they gathered too much seed. The women, somehow, in the midst of cyclones and flood, had saved their seeds. We owe our food to these farmers, not just in Africa, in Asia, and Latin America, but we need to start understanding that. One of the aspects to help food producers in Southern Africa is that they're promoting farmers' rights. There is an international treaty in 2004 that is recognizing under 100 crops, but at least it's a few crops, that cannot be patented, and that they will honor farmers' rights. So we have two opposing laws if you're into international environmental policy. One law is the IPRs, the intellectual property rights. The opposing one is farmers' rights. And they're like this, okay? They're incompatible. Southern Africa says let's have both, but we want farmers' rights, which means a farmer can take a seed, plant it, germinate it, propagate it, exchange it, even sell it locally. Farmers have a right to do anything they want to with seed in terms of production, exchange, and accumulation. Why? Because for 7,000 years, we've had farmers doing this, and they've given us our biodiversity. If you start privatizing the various plants you saw, then sorghum is owned by Monsanto. And they're saying no. So that they're promoting this through national coordinating committees, through national legislation. There is a study that Andrew's group is doing for creating legislative frameworks for farmers' rights in Malawi, Zambia, Sierra Leone. Here Zimbabwe's not in it, can't be. And Norway and the Netherlands, which I find fascinating. So the 5 countries are going to try to get a legislative framework for farmers' rights. And then another way in which they're trying to resist in terms of alternative ownership. One of them is farmers' rights, and the last one I'm not going to go into is alternative ownerships of land. If you think things are bad in Zimbabwe, it's a Sunday school picnic compared to when South Africa explodes. South Africa is on a 150-year trajectory for land reform, not tenable. And so Southern Africa has to come up with alternative forms of land ownership, not the World Bank's, certainly not American, and not European. And that's a constant discussion, controversy, and they're very much on it. And then finally, and this is the very last one, I'm very much, so that is the research, the kind of research I am doing in terms of the use of the theories, in terms of trying to look at what's going on in Southern Africa. I am totally privileged in that it's the farmers that ask us to do this research. I'm not doing work on agri-fuels because I thought it up. I was asked and approached to try to gather the information on agri-fuels. That particular chart you have is one I made. And it's just very, very rewarding as a scholar to feel useful. That's in Southern Africa. I come back home and I organize against the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa. I'm not going to go into it. It's basically, as I mentioned, the two foundations, Gates and Rockefeller, using their money to propagate, and I would use the word force, this industrial agricultural model on Africa. The latest information we have, the latest news item we have, is that Gates has just spent $5.5 million to an institute to lobby African governments to loosen up their laws on genetically modified restrictions. So it's a direct interference by the Gates Foundation in the legal frameworks of African governments trying to resist genetically modified. So I can go on more about that if you want to. The final note is my continuing work. I am going to be comparing, I am comparing the use of indigenous seed and commercial seed in Zimbabwe. If Zimbabwe does begin to heal, it will have Monsanto seed dumped on it. It can't stop it. And so we're at least going to try to watch it. I'm also looking at the privatization of U.S. foreign policy, as I said, and I certainly am going to enjoy continuing being involved in the debates on accumulation by dispossession. Thank you.